The weight crashes to the ground with a deafening clang, metal plates bouncing as a group of men burst into laughter, their eyes locked not on the barbell but on the figure beneath it, thin, trembling, drenched in sweat and humiliation. "You sure this place is for you, old man?" One of them jeers, his voice thick with disdain and mockery. The others snicker, some openly, pointing, others whispering behind flexed muscles and designer gym gear. And there, lying flat on the bench, gasping for breath with a twisted barbell across his chest, is Michael Grant, a man whose presence alone seems to offend them. Not because of what he does, but because of who he is, a disabled black veteran, 52 years old with a prosthetic left leg and a back hunched slightly from years of spinal injury. His t-shirt is faded and stretched. The words, "Vets for Life," barely readable. His sneakers are mismatched. One arm has burn scars snaking up to the shoulder, but his eyes, those deep, stormy eyes, remain locked on the ceiling, silent, defiant. Michael is a former Army sergeant, now working nights as a security guard at a local storage facility. He walks with a limp, often mistaken for weakness, and bears the kind of stillness that comes from surviving things others cannot imagine. His skin is dark, weathered by sun, and battle his jaw, square and firm beneath a coarse gray beard. He speaks little, smiles even less. Each morning, after his shift, he drags himself to this luxury gym, one offered free to veterans by a private donor, only to be greeted with stares, snickers, and the kind of treatment that cuts deeper than any wound he sustained in combat. The staff, young and impatient, rarely offer help. Some question his membership aloud. Others suggest he might be more comfortable in the rehab section. And then there's Brent Carver, a local fitness influencer with sculpted abs, a blinding smile, and an Instagram feed filled with protein shakes and Rolex watches. Brent is 29 white and believes the world belongs to him. He is also the loudest voice in the gym. "Dude's gonna hurt himself," Brent says to his camera, gesturing at Michael mid-live stream. This is a gym, not a nursing home. The comments flood in, laughing emojis, toxic encouragement. Michael hears it all. He always does, but he says nothing. He racks the weights, wipes down the bench with slow precision, and limps back to his corner, alone. The week continues like this, mockery echoing off the walls, whispered insults growing bold to trainers conveniently busy when Michael asks for a spot. Even the receptionist, a sharp-faced woman named Kelly, begins eyeing him with suspicion, as though any moment he might steal a dumbbell. Yet every day, Michael returns. He trains slowly, methodically, recording nothing, seeking no validation. But behind each rep is a storm, building every insult. A brick in the fortress he's constructing inside himself. The silence, the pain, the memories of battlefields and broken brothers, they all churn into something dangerous and focused. One Thursday morning, a new flyer goes up, citywide adaptive powerlifting championship. This Saturday. All skill levels, sponsored by Apex Gym. Brent and his crew are already laughing about it. Maybe Grandpa will enter. One of them, says Brent, scoffs. Please, he can't even lift a lunch tray. Michael stands quietly nearby, eyes fixed on the poster. That night he signs up. No one sees him do it. No one expects him to show up. The morning of the event, the gym is packed with athletes, spectators, local press, and sponsors. Brent is there in branded gear, filming warm-up sets, flexing in every mirror. His followers pour in online. "Watch me crush the comp," he says, live. Then, as the competition begins, a hush falls over the crowd. Michael steps forward, not in gym clothes but in a crisp black shirt tucked into old military pants. His prosthetic leg gleams under the lights. He is calm, unmoving like a statue carved from iron. The officials whisper. The audience murmurs. Brent bursts into laughter. Wait, he's actually competing. The announcer stumbles over his words. Next lifter, Michael Grant, representing Veterans United. There's a pause, then a smattering of polite applause. Michael walks to the barbell chocks his hands and lies down. The weight is heavy deadlift category, intermediate tier. He grips it. The room holds its breath. And then, slowly, impossibly, he lifts. His arms tremble, the prosthetic leg locking in place with each inch. The bar rises. His muscles scream, but his eyes remain still focused. He completes the lift. The judge nods. The buzzer sounds. The gym explodes, not with laughter, but stunned silence. He steps off, nods once, and returns to his seat. The next round begins. He lifts again, then again, each time heavier, each time cleaner. By the final round, he's tied with Brent. The room is electric, cameras everywhere. Brent's turn, he attempts a personal best. He yells, screams, pulls, but the bar doesn't rise. He drops it with a curse. Then it's Michael's turn. The final lift. The bar is loaded with the championship weight. Michael steps forward. His shirt is soaked. His back is raw, but his hands do not shake. He kneels a locks and breathes once and lifts. The bar rises like thunder. A gasp echoes through the crowd. He holds. He locks. He wins. The buzzer screams. And for the first time in years, Michael allows himself to smile. The crowd erupts. Reporters push forward. Veterans in the audience stand and salute. Brent stares, mouth open, frozen. Later, backstage, Brent approaches him, voice tight with disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" Michael looks at him. Calm. "I'm the man you mocked, the man you filmed, the man you laughed at, and I'm the man who just beat you." Brent sputters, but Michael walks away. Out on the stage, the announcer raises Michael's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, your champion, Staff Sergeant Michael Grant, retired." A hush, then roaring applause, tears in the eyes of strangers. One young boy in a wheelchair claps with all his might. Michael looks at him, nods, and places the gold medal around the boy's neck. "For the next champion," he says. That moment, captured and shared, spreads like wildfire. Not on Brent's feed, but across the hearts of millions. The man they mocked was a warrior, a survivor, a hero, and he never needed to prove it. But he did anyway, not for pride, but for every soul ever doubted, dismissed, or disrespected. In a world obsessed with perfection, he reminded them what true strength looks like. And from that day forward, no one ever laughed when Michael walked into the gym again. They stood. They nodded. They made way because prejudice is loud, but dignity is louder, and justice, like Michael's final lift, rises slow. But when it does, it is unstoppable. As Michael exits the stage, the medal no longer around his neck, but resting proudly on that young boy's chest. A hush follows him like a ripple through still water. Not from awe alone, but from a quiet reckoning that settles over every face in that building. Every smirk that once curled in arrogance now melts into shame. Every dismissive glance now drops to the floor, and Brent, for all his muscles and followers and shallow charisma, finds himself, for the first time in his curated life, truly invisible. No camera can save him. No protein. Endorsement can rewrite what just unfolded in front of the world. Michael, unaware of the storm his victory has stirred online, walks through the back corridor of the gym, where the air is cooler, quieter, carrying only a battered gym bag, and the weight of memory he doesn't smile. Not out of coldness, but because inside him lives a sacred silence shaped by years of combat loss and the kind of discipline that makes applause feel unnecessary. Outside, a reporter tries to flag him down, breathless, offering interviews, sponsorships, maybe even a book deal. But Michael simply nods, politely declines, and limps past them all toward the parking lot, where a rusted Ford truck waits its paint, chipped its radio broken, but to him it is a chariot of peace. That night he eats alone, as always, a simple meal of rice and beans at the small kitchen table in his modest apartment. Framed photos of his unit above the sink. The Purple Heart collecting dust beside unopened letters from the VA. But something has shifted. The air feels different, as if the world finally caught a glimpse of the truth behind the silence he carries. By morning, his phone won't stop buzzing calls from veterans, messages from strangers who saw the clip and wept gym chains offering him free memberships, schools asking him to speak to students, even a city council member inviting him to a ceremony in his honor. But what strikes Michael most is a handwritten letter slid under his door, the handwriting rough, nervous. It's from Brent. The note is short and shaky with sincerity. I watched the full video. I'm sorry. You didn't just lift the weight you lifted something off me, too. If you ever let me train with you, I'd be honored. Michael reads it twice, folds it quietly, and places it next to his dog tags. The next morning, he returns to the gym. Eyes turn again, but this time with respect, curiosity, even admiration. And Brent is there, waiting, not with a camera, but with humility in his eyes and no phone in sight. Without a word, Michael nods once and gestures to the bench Brent follows. From that moment, they train not as equals, not yet, but as men attempting something rare in this world. Transformation not of body, but of spirit over time. Michael begins to speak more, share, more not about his medals, but about his men. The ones who never came home, the real champions. And slowly, Brent listens. Truly listens, his arrogance shedding like sweat with each rep. Soon others join veterans, teenagers, single mothers, a boy with cerebral palsy. What began as a place of judgment becomes something else entirely. A sanctuary of second chances built not by equipment or trainers, but by the quiet leadership of a man who never asked to lead, only to be left in peace. Months later, the gym adds a plaque near the entrance, mounted on steel polished with care. It reads, "The Michael Grant Center for Adaptive Strength, where true power rises." Michael doesn't attend the unveiling. He's not interested in ceremonies. He's out back, spotting a new recruit and amputee, just like him, whispering steady encouragement between clenched teeth. Because, for Michael, the real championship wasn't the medal or the moment. It was this lifting others without ever needing to be lifted in return. And in that quiet, unseen labor, he changed not just a gym, not just a city, but the very definition of strength itself forever. And so the seasons pass, but Michael Grant becomes more than a man. He becomes a movement not through social media trends or news cycles that fade, but through daily acts of grit, grace, and quiet revolution. The gym that once echoed with ridicule now resonates with a different sound. The clink of determined lifters, the breath of people pushing past pain, the laughter of strangers who once avoided each other, now spotting each other without hesitation, and at the center of it all is Michael, never on a pedestal, never asking for thanks, just present as steady and immovable as iron veterans from across the state. Start traveling just to shake his hand, and a growing community of people with disabilities and trauma survivors gather every weekend in the back corner of the gym, calling it the barracks, where judgment doesn't enter and every struggle is honored. Local news outlets continue to reach out, and though Michael rarely accepts interviews, he agrees to speak at one school where a student who lost his father in Afghanistan requested him personally. The auditorium is full. Teachers skeptical at first. Students fidgeting in their seats until Michael steps onto the stage wearing the same black shirt and military pants, holding only a walking stick and a folded photo of his unit. He says nothing at first, just lets the silence fill the room. Then, with a voice calm and low like distant thunder, he begins not with war, but with shame. The shame of being ignored, of being mocked, of being seen as invisible even in your own neighborhood. He tells them how strength isn't found in muscles or medals, but in restraint, in getting up one more time after you have been publicly torn down and refusing to let someone else define your worth. A girl in the front row starts crying silently. A boy, who's always bullied for being small, suddenly sits up straighter. Teachers forget their clocks. And when Michael ends placing the photo gently on the podium, the entire room stands not with applause, but in silence. A tribute more powerful than cheers. Word spreads, donations pour in. Not to Michael, but to the Veterans Rehab Center he volunteers at every Saturday. Someone starts a scholarship in his name, but he shrugs off the fame. His answer is always the same. I'm just here to lift, and he is every day. Even when the aches return, even when the world spins on with its usual chaos, Michael shows up limping. Yes, but unbroken. Eventually, the gym chains invite him to consult on new accessibility programs. One company tries to turn him into a brand ambassador, offering thousands for a photo shoot. He declines. Instead, he helps design a new lifting prosthetic for combat veterans, partnering with a group of engineers from a local university, one of whom was once a teen who watched him win the championship and had never forgotten. At the same time, Brent, now quieter, humbler, slowly rebuilds himself, not just his body, but his purpose. He closes his influencer accounts and starts a nonprofit called Earned Iron, offering free training for disabled lifters and names. Michael as honorary co-founder. One evening, after a long session, Brent asks Michael if he ever misses the battlefield. Michael pauses, then says, "No, I miss the men. I miss the silence after the worst has happened, because in that silence you know exactly who you are." Brent nods, finally understanding. The world outside the gym continues to change some parts faster than others, but inside those walls something has taken root that can't be shaken. Young men walk in thinking they own the place and walk out learning what it means to belong. Older women return to strength after surgeries. Teenagers bring their fathers to meet the sergeant and Michael. He just keeps lifting, not because he needs to, because he chooses to. Because every barbell is a truth, every rep a reminder that strength comes in forms. The world is still learning to recognize, and as the sun sets each day over the battered Ford in the parking lot, and the streetlights flicker on around a quiet man locking up the gym for the night, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. The legacy of Michael Grant is not forged in gold or glory, but in iron, in silence, in the way hearts shift when dignity walks into a room and doesn't say a word. Would you like a visual prompt based on one of these moments? But legacies like Michael Grant's don't just sit still. They ripple outward, changing people who never even met him, carving new paths through hardened minds like water over stone. Months pass, and the barracks becomes a national pilot model for inclusive training spaces, with gyms from coast to coast requesting guidance on how to serve veterans amputees, the elderly, and the overlooked. But when a young congresswoman named Arya Nguyen, daughter of a refugee raised in the foster system now rising in Washington, hears Michael's story through a viral classroom clip. She does something no one expects. She flies down, unannounced walks through the glass doors of the gym with no camera crew. No press, just herself. Small, sharp-eyed, wearing a blazer and sneakers, and asks to speak with him, calling him Staff Sergeant Grant, with the kind of reverence only someone raised among survivors can understand. Michael, never one for politicians, nods politely, but says little, until she explains that she's drafting a bill that would guarantee every city has at least one free adaptive gym for veterans and civilians with physical disabilities named the Grant Initiative. Still, Michael doesn't light up. He just looks her in the eyes and says, "Don't make it about me. Make it about who comes after." And that becomes the slogan. The bill passes committee with unanimous support. News spreads further than ever before. But Michael keeps his head down. He still trains every morning, still spots Brent during his heaviest sets, still sits quietly in the corner after a lift. Eyes closed as if listening to something deeper than the music in the gym. The walls now hold more than weights photos of veterans' kids who overcame scoliosis. A blind teenager learning to deadlift by touch. One day, a young man enters wearing army boots too big for him. A hoodie pulled tight, a nervous tremble in his hands. He says nothing, just sits by the wall and watches. It takes a week before he speaks. He's 19, just lost both his legs in an IED explosion. Doesn't believe in anything anymore, especially himself. But Michael doesn't rush. He just nods and says, "We start with the bar, not the weight." That young man becomes the next story, and the next, and the next. And somewhere along the line, even Brent starts lecturing at community centers about humility, failure, and finding meaning beyond validation. Years pass. The gym becomes legend. A documentary is made, but Michael only agrees on one condition. No narration, just raw footage. The sound of plates, clinking of breath, and silence and healing. When it premieres at a national film festival, people cry not from sadness but because of what rises in them hope. But even as his story spreads, Michael lives simply. His Ford eventually dies. He walks now, or is driven by others, often the very people he once trained. He still won't take money, still won't sell his name, and when a journalist finally corners him and asks, "Why? Why turn down the offers, the books, the wealth, the stage?" Michael looks past the camera eyes, far away, and filled with a knowing ache, and says, "Because if I become the brand, they'll forget the point. I didn't win to be seen, I won, so others could." One cold winter morning, the gym hosts its 5th annual Adaptive Lifting Championship. Brent organizes it. Veterans fly in from 6 states. Michael is late. Unusual people murmur. Minutes pass. Then the door opens, but it's not Michael. It's the young man who lost both legs. He wheels in, holding a folded note. Quiet falls. Brent opens it and reads aloud, voice cracking, "To those who rise, my time under the bar is done. My breath has slowed. My hands have steadied, I leave the weight to you. Lift not for glory, but for those who never had the chance the iron will remember. MG. And they do. They lift in silence, one by one, in honor. And that day, no one wins, because everyone does. And though Michael Grant never stepped on another stage, his presence never left. It's in every lifter who shakes with fear but lifts anyway. In every scar that isn't hidden. In every quiet nod between strangers who recognize pain and choose to keep going. His legacy is not in gold. It is in grit, in grace, in iron. Would you like me to continue into the next generation how Michael's influence lives on years later? Years turn like pages in a wind-blown book. But the name Michael Grant refuses to fade, living not in headlines or monuments, but in the breath of people lifting themselves through pain, fear, and the silence of being underestimated. A decade after his final note was read aloud, the once small adaptive lifting event has grown into a nationwide movement known simply as The Lift, held each year across all 50 states, where competitors of every shape wound and origin gather not to beat each other, but to beat doubt, and at the center of it all, at every banner, every starting barbell. One phrase is printed in black iron script. The iron will remember. MG. A museum in Atlanta now displays his original prosthetic leg and lifting belt behind a thick sheet of glass. But people don't come for the objects. They come to read the handwritten logbooks he left behind each page, full of notes about strangers he trained, strangers he believed in before they ever believed in themselves. And among the visitors is a quiet young girl named Malia Carter, a 13-year-old from Chicago with a spinal condition, a back brace, and a dream to compete one day. Her father is a mechanic. Her mother works nights as a nurse, and they've both been saving for 3 years to afford a proper trainer. But when Malia sits on the museum bench and reads Grant's quote, "We start with the bar, not the weight," something stirs inside her, something unbreakable. That same year, her city opens its first Grant unit inside a downtown YMCA, a room equipped for adaptive lifters, trainers certified in trauma care, and walls painted with silhouettes of soldiers and children lifting side by side. Malia trains there, every morning, rain or shine. 2 years later, she becomes the youngest person ever to open the lift at the national event. She wheels herself onto the stage, smiles through trembling lips, and whispers to the crowd, "This one's for Sergeant Grant." And she lifts, clean, powerful. The crowd rises somewhere in the back. An old veteran wipes his eyes across the country in a prison gym. Inmates pause to watch the live stream. In a hospital, a teenage cancer survivor squeezes his nurse's hand, whispering, "If she can, I can." But Malia isn't the only torchbearer. Brent Carver, now graying and grizzled, runs a national foundation that funds adaptive sports equipment for low-income families. He visits schools, prisons, shelters, anywhere the forgotten gather, and tells them about the day he laughed at a man who turned out to be a mountain. On his wrist, he wears a plain black bracelet engraved with just 2 letters, MG. And each year, on the day of the lift, he sits alone for a while in silence, watching the sun rise with a notebook open, writing a letter to Michael even though he knows no one will read it. It's become a ritual, a grounding, a vow, and somewhere deeper still in basements and garages and makeshift training rooms a new generation grows up, knowing that strength is not what the world shows on magazine covers, but what Michael Grant showed the world, a strength forged in silence, dignity scars and choice parents now name their children after him. A film is made not a blockbuster, but a slow, haunting documentary that wins awards for its honesty. Its final scene is a single shot of a worn barbell on a rack in the old Apex gym. No narration, no music, just dust floating in the sunbeam where Michael once stood. In that silence, audiences cry, not because he died, but because something in them woke up. And so long after his last breath, after his last rep, after the final note slid beneath the door, Michael Grant lifts, still not with muscle but with meaning, raising thousands from the floor of despair into something higher. The iron remembers, and even now, as the world changes faster than breath, Michael Grant's legacy continues, not preserved in stone, but passed from soul to soul like a whisper in the weight room, or a steady hand on a trembling back. 15 years after his last competition, a storm brews in the city of Detroit, where a new gym opens, not sleek or flashy, but carved out of an abandoned warehouse, funded not by corporations, but by a coalition of former competitors, wounded veterans, teachers, and ex-convicts who all once stood under the same roof where Michael once trained. They name it simply Fort Grant. No neon sign, just rusted metal letters bolted to concrete. Inside, there are no mirrors, no music blasting, only the sound of breath, of effort, of the old clatter of iron that echoes like distant thunder. At the heart of Fort Grant is a mural massive and raw, painted by a deaf artist who had never touched a barbell until watching Malia Carter on a live stream years before. It shows Michael standing alone back to the viewer facing a rising sun with his prosthetic leg grounded in cracked earth and his hands gripping an invisible weight that rises into fire and sky. Underneath a single sentence, he lifted more than weight, but Fort Grant is more than a gym. It becomes a sanctuary, a last chance. A place where addicts fight their way back to themselves, one push-up at a time, where a former police officer trains side by side with the man he once arrested, where a teenage refugee girl learns to squat next to a grandmother with Parkinson's, where men cry in public for the first time on the floor beside the bench in the quiet after a failed lift, only to feel someone's hand on their shoulder and hear, "You're not done yet." And deep in that building, in a small private room lined with shelves, lies Michael's original training notebook, its pages faded, sweat-stained, but still breathing. It's guarded not by security, but by tradition. New trainers must read from it before teaching. Visitors must leave something behind: a patch, a note, a wristband, a pain. And one day, Malia Carter, now grown a national coach, and the face of adaptive athletics, walks into that room with a girl no older than she was back then. This girl, Ava, was born without arms and told she would never live independently. But Ava, wide-eyed, stares at the worn pages, places her chin gently on the desk and whispers, "He still lives, doesn't he?" Malia kneels beside her, her voice soft but unshakable. Yes, he never stopped. That year, Ava becomes the first lifter to compete using only her neck and core muscles, and she finishes her lift. The crowd doesn't roar. They stand silent, reverent, because they understand now. It's not about victory, it's about defiance, dignity refusing to vanish across the world in places Michael never knew. Kenya, Ukraine. Rural Vietnam, small community gyms adopt his model. A tech company releases an AI-driven prosthetic named GRNT, but still no statue is built. No street is renamed, just quiet gyms. full hearts, bruised knuckles, people who were once nothing in the world's eyes, now walking taller, lifting heavier, not because they are strong, but because someone once showed them they could be. And one final day, in a quiet sunrise ceremony attended by only a few Michael's ashes, are buried under the foundation of Fort Grant. No gravestone, just a barbell welded into the concrete. Above it, the phrase carved in steel, "Strength is who you lift." And still the iron remembers. But stories like Michael Grant's don't truly end. They evolve, echoing louder in the hearts of those who carry his fire forward. And 20 years after that first lift that silenced a gym and awakened a world, his presence is no longer just memory. It is legacy incarnate, breathing in every rep of a child once told. No pulsing in the veins of lifters who rise from wheelchairs, crutches, trauma, silence, and sweat to stand where no one expected them to. Across oceans now, in deserts and mountains, Fort Grant outposts appear not franchises but beacons. Converted train stations in South Africa, bamboo-framed huts in flooded Bangladesh, rooftop gyms in Brazil where orphans lift with milk jugs tied to broomsticks, and each one begins with the same ritual. They lower the weight bar to the ground. Everyone kneels, the room falls still, and the eldest in the room says aloud, "To those who rise," and the lifters answer, "The iron will remember." Back in Detroit, the original Fort Grant becomes a sacred place. Not religious, but revered, visited by pilgrims, not seeking miracles, but seeking proof that a man like them once walked through hell with dignity intact. And among those who walk through its doors, one fateful morning is a quiet boy named Caleb 13. Tall, but curled inward, carrying a limp and a scar across his scalp from surviving a house fire that took his parents and crushed his spirit. He doesn't speak. He doesn't lift. He just watches for days, then weeks. Then one day he reaches out and touches the mural of Michael, his fingers resting on the line. He lifted more than weight, and he breaks into silent tears, the kind that shake the soul free. It is Malia who finds him, now nearing 40 silver streaks in her hair back, still straight as steel. She sits beside him and tells him what no therapist ever did. It's okay to be angry, just don't let the anger lift alone. Caleb begins training slowly, silently, until one day he deadlifts 95 pounds. Everyone claps, but he only looks up at the mural, whispers, "Thank you," and adds his name to the old logbook with a shaking hand. Elsewhere, Brent Carver, now retired from the public work, his hair fully white, lives in a modest home near a lake. But each year he still visits Fort Grant on the anniversary of Michael's passing. He sits on the original bench where he once mocked the man who would change his life places, a hand on the cold metal bar, and says softly, "You taught me how to live. Not lift, live." Then he leaves behind a folded letter for the next visitor. One spring, a documentary team creates a global film called The Weight That Raised Us, premiering at Cannes, and eventually winning every human rights award for its portrait of how one man without wealth, power, or fame forged a movement of inclusion, dignity, and radical strength. But still, there are no bronze statues, no highways named after him. And that's exactly how Michael would have wanted it, because the real statue stands every time someone is told they're too broken, too poor, too late, and they stand anyway. In Gaza, a one-legged boy lifts water jugs in a bombed-out alley, whispering, "MG." In Sweden, a teen with Tourette's enters a gym and finds a Grant banner above the squat rack. In Laos, A former child soldier opens the first Fort Grant unit in Southeast Asia, inscribed with the line, "We start with the bar, not the weight." Even language barriers fall away, because strength, like suffering, is universal. And so, one day, years later, as a massive world event begins, the first adaptive Olympic Games hosted in Johannesburg. An aging Malaya Carter steps to the stage as the torchbearer. She holds the flame. The crowd rises. Reporters hush. And she speaks only one sentence. This flame began with one man's silence. Then she lifts the torch, her back unshaken, and lights the cauldron. The crowd erupts, not in sound, but in tears, in awe, in memory. And on every screen around the world, one image is broadcast, a still photo of Michael Grant standing at his first championship. Lifting not a barbell, but the weight of us all. Because some men don't just change the world. They change what the world believes is possible, and the iron always remembers. But as time presses forward and generations shift, the story of Michael Grant transforms from legacy into legend. Not the distant kind whispered in myths, but a living truth carved into flesh, breath, and steel, so that even those born decades after his passing feel his presence like gravity in every room where struggle meets resolve. Now it is the year 2087, and the world is both unrecognizable and deeply the same. Cities stretch skyward in shimmering glass. Machines hover in silent precision prosthetics, now interface with thought, and yet still deep in the underground levels of old cities beneath the noise and the neon. There are iron temples called Fort Grant, where people gather not to escape the future, but to remember the soul of strength. In a dim, sweat-slicked gym beneath what was once Chicago, a girl named Isa, 16, brown-skinned, born with brittle bone disease and artificial lungs, stands trembling before a custom barbell forged from recycled spacecraft alloy. Around her silence, all she hears is the thrum of her heartbeat and the low voice of her trainer reading from an ancient, cracked book. We start with the bar, not the weight. Her hands wrapped in graphene bands grip the bar. It's not about how heavy. It's about who she becomes if she dares to try. And she lifts not much, not far, but enough to trigger the biometric sensors enough to set off a silent flash of light that marks her first completed rep. The room erupts, not in noise, but in stillness. 1,000 faces watching from digital feeds across the globe blink away tears. Because on that lift hangs more than progress, it carries memory. That night, Isa is shown a hologram stored deep in the gym's vault, played only for those who've proven heart over hype. It flickers, grainy analog. A man, dark-skinned. Weathered face, military pants, prosthetic leg. He lifts a barbell slowly, silently, while an unseen crowd holds its breath. Then he smiles. Brief, soft, steady, and says, "The iron doesn't care who you are, but it remembers what you endure." Isa watches that clip 100 times, and she decides she will not only lift, she will build. Years later, she becomes an architect of the first orbital Fort Grant unit, a weightless training chamber for those with no planet to return to, refugees, explorers, survivors of gravity's cruelty. There in 0G she inscribes on the entrance, "Let no man be measured by the surface they stand on, but by the will they rise with." Back on Earth, the old Fort Grant in Detroit is now preserved beneath a transparent dome, part of the global archive of human perseverance. Inside, the original mural, Michael facing the sun, still stands untouched. Visitors float in silence past it, their hands touching their chests, mimicking the gesture of thousands before them. The name Michael Grant has never been turned into merchandise. No digital influencer ever claimed it. His family, long gone, left no heirs, and yet his influence touches billions. Because every time someone stands up after being told to stay down, every time someone lifts a weight symbolic or real, every time a teacher sees potential where others see pity, Michael's truth lives again. In this future, people no longer say, "Be strong." They say, "Lift like Grant." In schools, his story is taught not in history class but in ethics. In design, his prosthetic innovations spark the latest breakthroughs. And in poetry, children write lines like, "He spoke in silence," and moved the earth. And far above the clouds orbiting Earth, the final image in the Fort Grant constellation. A satellite shaped like a barbell transmits one line on loop, not to machines or soldiers or stars, but to anyone who might be listening. To those who rise, the iron remembers. And so the story of Michael Grant, once a silent man mocked in a gym, ends not with applause, not with monuments, but with movement. A global, eternal rise of those once forgotten, now standing tall, with trembling hands and steady hearts. In every rep, lifted by a child in pain, in every breath, drawn by someone told they'll never belong, in every tear that falls after a small personal triumph. Michael lives on. He became more than man, more than mentor, more than memory. He became a mirror showing us who we could be when we choose courage over cruelty, dignity over ego, silence over spectacle. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the original Fort Grant gym, beneath the faded mural and beside the rusted barbell buried in concrete, there is a single handwritten plaque, dusty and worn, that simply says, "If this story moved you, go lift someone else." Because in the end, the weight wasn't just iron. It was injustice. And he lifted it for all of us. If you believe stories like Michael's deserve to be told, if you felt something stir in your chest reading this, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel. Share the story. Leave a comment for those who've ever been doubted. Together, let's build a world where everyone has a chance to rise. One rep, one story. One soul at a time. Subscribe now, and remember, the iron remembers.